All right, English 1301 folks, this is the second video for week 15. So if you haven't watched the supplemental one, make sure that you're taking some time to do that because I go over things that you really need to avoid in your portfolio your portfolio revisions, as well as some things that are going to be helpful when we're thinking about research, right? Which is pretty appropriate for the portfolio. So I'm going to finish up some of those ideas here and then get into what we need to accomplish this week, okay? So going back, so I left off with the you, right? And so depending on the kind of program you're using, you need to find, the little, this is a magnifying glass. So find the little magnifying glass or hit Control F if you're using a PC or Command F if you're using a Mac. This should pretty much work in Google Docs or anything. If you can't figure out how to use the find feature, then go to the help area of whatever program you're using, because once you see how many times you have written you in your submission, you may be really surprised, right? Because we write the way that we talk, right? And in conversation, using you is not a big deal. You're not going to get, points taken off of your conversation every time you use it. But in more formal kind of academic writing, we want to avoid the overuse of that. If you've done it once or twice in your portfolio entries, that's okay. But there are some of us who it's, the first paragraph it's just all highlighted because there's so many times that you've done that. So avoid it. And the way to do that is to just choose to they or a person, or make it a little bit more general, or we. You can even use that first person because that's not necessarily making it overly conversational and informal, okay? All right, I do want to give you kind of heads up about how I'm going to be grading the final submission. So your draft and final are essentially going to be side by side. I have a computer screen that allows me to put two documents side by side, and I can read them both, and that's what I do. I pull up your draft and I note all the things that I mentioned in your feedback, and then I look to see if you adjusted those things, right? I'm also reading to find, any just overall changes, but I'm also just really looking to see, have you made those corrections? Have you taken into consideration what I provided for you in terms of feedback, right? If you haven't done anything, your grade will suffer. Okay, so make sure that you are looking at that feedback, and if you have any questions about that, you're reaching out to me. That's why I asked you to send me an email, a detailed email about that feedback, so that if you have any questions, we can answer those. Okay, so did you correct the issues? Is it clear that you did the required work and revisions? If you had, those kinds of revisions, some of you submitted very almost finalized drafts. The grading is going to be more intensive, right? It will be more intensive because we've gone through peer review. Not only that, we started with these prompts that you got a grade for, right? You then revised them and went through peer review. You then revised them and you turned in the draft to me. I gave you feedback and you should go through another round of revisions. If your work is still showing all kinds of issues, errors, things that I noted in the first video, your grade is going to reflect that. And that's not me trying to say that your writing is bad or that you as a writer are lacking in some way. No, that just means your grade is going to reflect what is the time that you put into it in terms of the edits, the suggestions, our conversations, etc. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, I do want to talk a little bit about MLA quoting and examples because I know this can get a little confusing and overwhelming, especially when we're thinking about Choi. Because in Choi's article, she quotes so many great people like Jennifer 8 Lee, Dan Barber, who's a chef. We have all of these people that she's mentioning, but we have to make absolutely sure that when we are using those quotes or ideas by some of the people she references, that is clear for your audience, that they don't think all of those ideas are Choi's or all of those words are Choi's, or we're not maybe giving Choi credit for writing the article itself. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to post this on D2L so you can take some time to look at it. I'm going to give you examples using the full quote that appears in Choi's work and then how we can include it, right? So the full quote that I'm going to start with is, sometimes food means survival. That's a great quote, right? So we need to make sure that when we're including it in our sentence, we're thinking about all those things that Stedman said to avoid, right? The armadillo roadkill, the dating Spider-Man, all this kind of stuff, right? So the quote needs to be incorporated into a sentence and it needs to follow the right grammar, right? So in addition to identifying food as a form of status in different cultures, comma, Amy Choi also notes that sometimes food means survival. Okay, I've referenced Choi. I have made sure that this is actually Choi's words. These are Choi's words, not her use of somebody else's, right? So another example is here. You can take some time to look at that when you have a moment. Paraphrasing ideas is something we may have to do, right, to avoid Uncle Barry and all the quotes in a paragraph, right, from Stedman's work. So here's Choi's quote, "How a country savors a food is also telling." So the paraphrased information is here. So including author's name, right? We still are giving credit. Choi argues that it's important to consider how people in different countries enjoy and approach their food. Okay, so I've put it into my own words, and it's not, y'all, we can't just change every other word and then pass it off as our own. We have to completely rework a sentence and an idea to make sure that you're showing your audience you understand it and you are in no way plagiarizing, okay? So here's another paraphrased information. I mentioned Choi in the sentence, so I didn't necessarily have to put her name at the end in parentheses, but here's how you would do it if not. So you can look at that. This is where we're kind of getting held up because of course MLA is the worst and it's confusing, right? So we oftentimes with Choi's article are essentially quoting a quote, which it's in MLA called indirect sources, and you can look at the Purdue OWL for that, but I just call it quoting a quote. I don't know if that's more confusing. You can let me know. So the original quote is here. Notes Jennifer 8. Lee, what you want to cook and eat is an accumulation, a function of your experiences, right? So if we go back to this is the quote, right? Notes Jennifer 8. Lee, we have this quote, okay? So in order to make sure that we identify Jennifer 8. Lee as the person who has those ideas, this is how we would do it. Jennifer 8. Lee states that, quote, and I have a single quote in here to reference that we're quoting a quote. You don't necessarily have to worry about this in the new and updated MLA. Just make sure you have the quotation marks. Okay, so Jennifer 8. Lee states that what you want to cook and eat is an accumulation, a function of your experiences. Okay, that's great, but I'm not going to put Lee right here, right? Because if I am reading your paper and I'm like, okay, let me look at the citation for this. I would look at Lee's work if Lee is included in your citation, but that's not where the quote appears. The quote appears in Choi, and we have to make sure our audience knows that. So I put QTD period in Choi, and that means quoted in Choi, so that I know that this is where these words appear, okay? Note a few things. So take some time to look through this, and here's another quoting paraphrased information. So Choi writes, Jennifer Berg, a director of graduate studies at New York University, notes that food is particularly important when you become part of a diaspora, separated from your mother culture. Great quote, but how do we do that in MLA, right? So we want to still give Berg the credit for this idea. So Jennifer Berg, who is with New York University as their director of food studies, I'm introducing her, right? So I'm noting that Jennifer Berg is the person who had those ideas, and I'm also telling you who she is. Like, why should we care who Jennifer Berg is? Oh, she's this person who knows about food studies, connects the importance of diaspora and originating culture. But I'm still making sure that Choi is in there because Jennifer Berg didn't write this article, Choi did, okay? I also want you to note that, so what we're striving for is to match what's in parentheses to what will appear in the works cited, right? So I'm gonna switch over to works cited just to note, like, we need to make sure that we're following MLA format. So this is what it should look like. The date it was accessed. So if you look at the printout, At the very top is the date that I accessed it, which is what you can use, which is not the same as the publication date, right? All right, so you can use, let me pull that up. You can use this works cited, but this is essentially what your works cited should look like. So you can copy that. All right, let's go to D2L and go to the content area. All right, so we're in week 15 and I have noted that, this is what we're doing this week. You need to watch the videos, and then you're going to complete a checklist. This is something a little bit new, but you're going to complete a multimedia plan. And so what I've done is I put it in a Word form and in PDF. And so the PDF is something that you can, it's fillable, right? So this may be easier for all of you just to use instead of the Word format, but this is something that's just asking you to explain your project in as much detail as possible. This is really pushing you to start planning and picking, your topic, okay? So just fill in, you should have plenty of space to type in. And then I really want you to note that for numbers 5 and 6, we need complete paragraphs here. Okay, oh, I see my numbering is incorrect. I'm so sorry. So this should actually be 6 and 7, my bad. We need full drafts of your paragraphs here, especially paragraph 2, because this is where, as I mentioned in the explanation video, a lot of people lose credit because they're not citing and connecting what their ideas are to the text that we've read, right? So thinking about Choi, thinking about Ron Finley's video, that kind of thing. You want to support your ideas just like this is a research paragraph, because it is a research paragraph, okay? All right, so that's your multimedia plan. Let me know if you have questions. The portfolio checklist is something I want you to do before you submit your portfolio. And it's just going through and asking you to check, did you review the feedback? Have you reviewed the instructions? Are you double checking MLA, right? Are you finding and replacing you? Have you done a final spelling and grammar check, right? So once you complete that, then you can move on. And that's just, again, some of you said, oh, I forgot to do this right before I submitted, or, sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. I'm hoping this checklist just kind of helps with some of that before you submit. Okay, your final portfolio is to be submitted here, right? Upload as a Word file or a PDF, that's in the checklist, right? And then you'll submit your multimedia project plan in the assignments area of D2L. So remember, you can either use the PDF or the electronic version of the doc, the Microsoft Word formatting, right? So I just want you to note that Thursday is the checklist and the paper portfolio revisions, right? And that's a really big grade, y'all, so please be mindful. And then your multimedia project plan is going to be due on Sunday. For next week, you're going to read the multimedia project plan feedback, but I do mention, don't wait until you get the feedback from me. I'm going to try to get everybody's done by Tuesday, but everything for the multimedia plan is going to be due next Thursday. So start the artistic part. If you're doing a painting, if you're doing a video, just move forward with it. You may have to tweak a little bit based on my feedback, but usually the feedback is it doesn't ultimately force you to adjust your project. That's usually not what happens. It just means slight maybe adjustments in the slides or in the paragraphs, that kind of thing, if you're doing a PowerPoint, that kind of thing. But what I also want to tell you is that based on some conversations I had during the consultations last week, which I really enjoyed having that face-to-face time with some of you, I'm going to have kind of an open conversation via WebEx, and that's going to be on Wednesday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., hopefully after people are done with their workday and that kind of thing. And that's just for any of you to jump in and let me know if you have questions, not only just last minute questions about the portfolio that's due on Thursday, but also about your multimedia project. If you're thinking of it and you just want to make absolutely sure you're kind of moving in the right direction, that's an open conversation, okay? And I'll send an invite to all of you. It is not a grade. You are not required to join. It's just something I hope will be helpful. If you're not able to meet at those times, but you do still want to meet, you can always reach out to me via email and let me know what is a good time for you so we can set up a WebEx conversation, and I'll send you the invite for that individually. All right, y'all, if you have any questions, let me know or post in the Q&A area of our discussion board. We're at the finish line, just a little bit more, okay? Y'all are doing great. Good luck this week.